She said, "I've never been kissed," and the millionaire who made the rules finally fell. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main characters. It began on a night that smelled like rain and expensive cologne. The city skyline glowed through a wall of glass as thunder rolled in the distance. Inside a penthouse office on the 43rd floor, Ethan Vale sat behind a black marble desk, his reflection sharp in the window. Every inch of him looked controlled, the tailored suit, the stillness of his hands, the kind of man who believed emotions were just distractions dressed as feelings. Across from him, Lila Hart shifted nervously in her chair. Her hands clutched a manila envelope, damp from the rain she had run through to get here. Her blouse was a size too big. Her shoes still squeaked softly from puddles outside. She had come because she had no choice. Ethan's voice was calm, too calm. "Miss Hart," he said, sliding a crisp document across the desk. "This is a 6-month agreement. You will act as my fiancé during public events and family gatherings. In exchange, all financial obligations on your mother's medical bills will be covered in full." Lila blinked. "You mean pretend to be your fiancé?" He nodded, eyes unreadable. "Exactly that. It is a contract, not a relationship. 6 months. No emotions, no confusion, no physical affection outside of appearances." Her heart stuttered. "You really think love can be written in clauses?" Ethan leaned back slightly, lips curling into something between a smile and a warning. "I do not believe in love. I believe in results. You are punctual, polite, and desperate enough not to complicate this. That makes you perfect for the role." The rain tapped harder against the glass, steady as her pulse. She looked at the papers, at the columns of rules typed neatly in black ink. Her eyes caught one line that read, "No emotional attachment of any kind." "Why me?" she asked quietly. Ethan's gaze softened for the first time, almost like regret. "Because you are the only person I have met this month who does not want something from me." For a long second, silence filled the room, just rain, and the hum of the city below. Lila exhaled slowly, thinking of her mother lying in a hospital bed 2 floors away from eviction. She thought of the rent due, the overdue notices, the nurse's quiet apology that morning. "Without the payment, we cannot continue treatment." Her throat tightened. She picked up the pen. As the ink touched paper, Ethan watched her, every line of his jaw rigid, as if he too was signing away something invisible. When she finished, she placed the pen down carefully. "There," she whispered, "6 months of pretending." Ethan stood, buttoning his jacket. "Good. You start tomorrow. The first event is a charity gala. My assistant will brief you at 9. She nodded, clutching the copy of the contract like a shield. Then, just as she turned to leave, his voice stopped her. "Miss Hart," he said, quieter now, a word of advice. "Do not mistake this for a fairy tale. In my world, rules exist for a reason. The moment people break them, they break themselves." Lila met his eyes, blue, cold, yet flickering with something human beneath. "Maybe that is why you wrote them," she said softly. "To stop yourself from feeling anything real." Ethan's jaw clenched. "Good night, Miss Hart." Do. She stepped out into the hallway, the city lights reflecting off the marble floor like fallen stars. When the elevator doors closed, her breath trembled out of her chest. Somewhere deep down, she knew she had just stepped into something dangerous. Not because of the money, but because of the man who never let anyone in. Later that night, as she walked back to her small apartment, rain soaking through her coat, Lila took the contract from her bag. Her fingers traced the final rule printed at the bottom: no falling in love. She laughed under her breath, a sound halfway between fear and disbelief. "That one should be easy," she murmured. But the moment she said it, lightning flashed across the sky, and she felt something shift, a warning maybe, or a promise. Across town, Ethan stood by his window, a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand. He watched the storm blur the city into gold and silver streaks. His reflection stared back at him, the man who made the rules. And for the first time in years, he wondered what would happen if someone made him break them. Tomorrow, she would step into his world wearing borrowed heels and a brave smile. Tomorrow, she would become his fiancée in name only. And tomorrow, without knowing it, she would start to unravel every law he had ever built to keep his heart safe. Because every story that begins with a contract eventually asks the same question: what happens when the fine print starts to feel like fate? The next morning, the city woke under a silver sky. Lila stood at her window, clutching the same contract that had changed everything the night before. The ink had dried, but her doubts had not. She pressed her thumb against her mother's hospital bracelet, now tied around her wrist as a reminder. It was time to face the choice she had made. At exactly 9 o'clock, a black sedan waited in front of her apartment. The driver stepped out, polite but distant, opening the door without a word. Inside, she found a sealed envelope resting on the seat. Her name was written in perfect handwriting, Miss Hart. She opened it carefully. Inside was a note in Ethan's voice, clipped, cold, efficient. Wardrobe and itinerary enclosed. You will arrive at the penthouse by noon for fitting and instruction. The gala begins at 7. Punctuality is expected. Beneath the note was a card from Vale & Co., image consultants, and an invitation embossed in gold. The Carter Foundation Annual Charity Gala, black tie event. Her heart skipped. The names, the glamour, it was a world she had only seen in magazines while serving coffee to people who lived in it. Now, somehow, she was stepping inside. At the boutique, stylists swarmed around her with practiced smiles. "You are Mr. Vale's fiancé?" one of them asked, disbelief flickering behind her professional tone. Lila nodded, pretending confidence she did not feel. Dresses shimmered under bright lights, silk, velvet, sequins. One after another until the stylist held up a gown of deep navy blue, simple but graceful. "This one," the woman said softly. "This is the color of trust." By 6:30 that evening, Lila barely recognized the reflection in the mirror. Her hair swept into soft curls, eyes framed by light makeup, the gown hugging her in ways that made her forget the thrift store clothes still folded at home. For a moment, she felt like someone else, someone who belonged. The car took her straight to the Glasspire Hotel, where chandeliers the size of cars hung over marble floors. Paparazzi lights flashed outside the revolving doors, voices calling Ethan's name as he arrived in a sleek black tuxedo. Cameras caught every angle, every movement, every breath. When he turned toward her, the crowd seemed to blur. He looked exactly as he had the night before, precise, composed, unreadable. But for a fraction of a second, his eyes widened when he saw her. "Miss Hart," he said quietly, extending his arm. "You are punctual." "Good," she swallowed. "And you are early." He smirked faintly. "I prefer to control the narrative." Flashbulbs exploded as they stepped inside. His hand rested lightly on her back, the perfect image of affection. To everyone watching, they were a power couple. To her, it felt like walking a tightrope between admiration and fear. Inside the ballroom, crystal lights shimmered off champagne glasses. A jazz quartet played something soft and expensive. Ethan leaned close to whisper instructions. "Smile when spoken to. Speak briefly. Let them believe what they want." Lila nodded, but her nerves betrayed her. When an older woman in pearls approached one of the Carter board members, perhaps, and said, "My dear, how did you and Ethan meet?" Lila froze. Her brain went blank. Ethan answered smoothly before she could speak. "We met at a fundraiser for the arts." She corrected my speech about modern design. I have not stopped hearing about it since. Laughter. Applause. A brief touch to her hand that felt rehearsed, yet strangely grounding. Lila smiled, recovering her voice. "He is still wrong about modern design," she added lightly, and the woman laughed again. The scene flowed easily after that. They danced once, enough to feed the cameras. They posed beside a check presentation, the perfect public image. Yet beneath the elegance, Lila could feel Ethan's tension, the slight pause when she laughed too freely, the way he adjusted his cufflinks each time someone mentioned love or marriage. Later, as the evening quieted, she found herself standing alone on the terrace. Rain had started again, fine and cold against her skin. The city glowed below like liquid gold. She breathed in the scent of wet pavement and orchids. For the first time in months, she felt something close to peace. Then his voice came from behind her, low but steady. "You handled yourself well tonight." She turned. Ethan had removed his jacket, the rain darkening his white shirt at the shoulders. He looked almost human now, less sculpture, more man. "I was terrified," she admitted. "I thought I would embarrass you." He shook his head. You surprised me. How? You smiled. You looked like you meant it. She laughed softly. Maybe for a second I did. Ethan's eyes softened, catching something in her tone. You should not get used to it. This world rewards appearances, not honesty. Lila's gaze drifted back to the skyline. Maybe that is why everyone here looks so tired. Nay. Silence stretched between them. The rain fell harder, blurring the lights behind the glass doors. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then Ethan cleared his throat, slipping back into his familiar distance. I will have the driver take you home, he said. Tomorrow morning, my assistant will schedule etiquette training and schedule coordination. Lila smiled faintly. Training? You mean lessons in pretending? He looked at her for a long moment. In surviving. No. The elevator doors closed behind him a minute later. Lila stayed outside, watching his reflection disappear into the blur of glass and water. Somewhere inside, she felt the faintest pull. Not love, not yet, but the awareness that beneath his rules, there might be a man who once knew how to feel. When she finally returned home, she hung the navy dress on her wall like a dream she could not touch. Her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. You did well tonight. Remember the rules. She stared at it for a long time, then typed a reply she never sent. What happens if I break one? Instead, she turned off the phone and sat by the window, watching the city lights fade behind the rain. Somewhere across town, Ethan Vale poured himself another glass of whiskey, replaying her laughter in his mind. He had told her not to get used to smiling. He should have told himself the same thing. The days that followed moved like scenes in a movie Lila did not remember auditioning for. Every morning began with a list of obligations: charity lunches, rehearsed interviews, etiquette lessons in rooms that smelled of fresh roses and money. Everywhere she went, Ethan's name carried the weight of command. Hers was the silent echo that followed it. At first she thought she could handle it. Smile, speak when spoken to, look perfect, pretend. But pretense had a strange way of slipping into reality. The more time she spent around Ethan, the harder it became to separate the act from the man. On the third morning, she arrived at his penthouse for media rehearsal. The elevator doors opened to a view that could make anyone feel small, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson River, sunlight reflecting like liquid glass. Ethan was already there, seated on a white leather couch, reading the morning papers. Without looking up, he said, "You are 5 minutes early. That is acceptable." Lila rolled her eyes, half amused. "You make being on time sound like a sin." He finally met her gaze. "Punctuality tells me you respect boundaries. That matters in business and arrangements." She smiled faintly. "Is that what we are, Ethan? An arrangement?" He hesitated. "That is all we can be." The words fell heavy, yet his tone softened when he saw her expression. "Lila, this contract protects you as much as it protects me. There are things you do not know about my world, things that can hurt you." She took a slow breath. "I grew up on second jobs and overdue rent. I can handle being hurt." He looked at her for a long second, a quiet, unreadable look that seemed to see through the armor she wore. Then, just as quickly, he turned away. "Let us begin." They sat side by side while his assistant, Claire, read sample interview questions. "How did you two meet?" Claire asked in her sharp, professional tone. Ethan replied smoothly. "At a fundraiser. She insulted my design philosophy." "Again?" Lila said under her breath, fighting a smile. "It works," he murmured. "People enjoy banter." Claire looked unimpressed. "Try sounding like you actually like her, Mr. Vale." Ethan blinked. "Excuse me?" She gestured toward Lila. "You talk about her like she is a board member, not a fiancée. Warm it up. Give them something to believe." "Ta!" He opened his mouth to argue, but Lila cut in softly. "Maybe she is right." Ethan's gaze locked on hers. "And what would you have me say?" Lila shrugged. "Tell them the truth you want them to believe, that you found someone who makes you forget to check your watch." The room went quiet. Even Claire stopped typing. Ethan looked at her as if he had forgotten how to breathe for a second, then forced a smile. "That will do for the interview," he said tightly. After Claire left, silence settled between them. Lila fidgeted with the hem of her sleeve. "Did I say something wrong?" Ethan stood, walking toward the window. "You have a dangerous imagination." "Dangerous?" He turned back, eyes colder now. "You make fiction sound real. That can ruin people like me." Her voice trembled. "And what about people like me?" He did not answer. The city stretched behind him, sharp and golden, like a cage made of light. That night, Lila stayed awake thinking about the look he had given her. Not anger, not quite sadness, but something like recognition. As if he had seen a part of himself he had tried to forget. The next day, their routine continued. They attended a board dinner at a private rooftop restaurant. The tables were dressed in silver, the skyline glittered below. Lila's heels clicked softly on the marble as she followed Ethan to their table. Midway through the dinner, a shareholder's wife leaned forward with a polite smile that hid a dagger. "So, Lila dear, what exactly do you do? Besides keeping Ethan entertained, of course." A hush fell over the table. Ethan froze. Lila felt the burn of 100 eyes waiting for her to crumble. She could have smiled and deflected. But instead, she met the woman's gaze and said gently, "I used to be a waitress. I am still learning how to fit in here. But at least now, I do not have to pretend to understand everything." There was a pause, then laughter, genuine and warm. Even the woman smiled in defeat. Ethan's eyes softened, a flicker of pride hidden behind his composure. Later, when the dinner ended and the city wind swept across the rooftop, Ethan approached her. "You did not have to answer her like that," he said quietly. "Yes, I did," Lila replied. "You hired me to act, remember? That was acting. With honesty. Jumbo." He looked at her with something close to wonder. "You are not afraid of them." "I am not afraid of people who hide behind money." Ethan exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening as though holding back a confession. "You should be. That kind of fear keeps you safe." She smiled sadly. "I think it just keeps you lonely." For a moment they stood there under the city lights, the wind lifting the ends of her hair. His hand twitched slightly, as if he almost reached for her. Then he stopped himself. "Good night, Lila," he said finally. She watched him walk away, disappearing through the glass doors. The faint sound of thunder rolled over the skyline. Back in the car, Lila leaned her head against the window, watching raindrops chase each other down the glass. She thought about how every rule Ethan had made was really a wall. And every wall, no matter how tall, eventually cracked. Across the city, Ethan sat in his study, the same storm echoing against his windows. He stared at a single rule highlighted in the contract, no emotional attachment of any kind. He had written it to protect himself. Now, it read like a warning he could no longer follow. He poured a drink he never tasted, listening to the rain. In the reflection of the glass, he could still see her, the woman who smiled through fear, who spoke truth in rooms full of lies. And for the first time, Ethan Vale, the man who made the rules, began to wonder how much longer he could keep living by them. The following weeks turned into a blur of motion and transformation. What began as a performance slowly turned into a strange kind of routine, almost like a life neither of them had planned to live but somehow could not stop living. Every morning, Lila arrived at Ethan's penthouse for briefings and events. Each evening, they appeared side by side before flashing cameras and elegant crowds. To the world, they looked inseparable. To each other, they were still bound by a piece of paper that told them not to feel. But feelings did not follow rules. On a Monday morning, Claire, Ethan's assistant, arrived with a large folder and a sharp voice. "Lila, your next 2 weeks are packed. You will have etiquette lessons, charity press meetings, and your public media portrait session next Friday." "Naba." Lila smiled politely. "A portrait session?" Claire nodded. "Every fiancé of Mr. Vale gets one. It becomes part of the family archive. Just another way of saying, welcome to the stage." When Claire left, Ethan looked up from his laptop. "It is important you take this seriously." Lila crossed her arms. "Is there anything in your life that is not serious?" He closed the computer. "Not anymore." Something flickered in his voice, something that made her stop teasing. She sat across from him, eyes softening. "You talk like a man who lost something." He looked at her quietly, then said, "I did, a long time ago." She wanted to ask what, but before she could, his phone buzzed with a business alert. The moment was gone, buried under numbers and strategy calls. By Friday, the portrait session had turned into a full production. Photographers, makeup artists, and stylists filled the penthouse like a movie set. Lila stood under the bright lights, her navy blue dress flowing against the glass windows behind her. Ethan stood beside her, every detail of his suit perfect. "Hold his hand," the photographer said. "Closer. Pretend you are in love." Lila hesitated, then placed her hand in Ethan's. His fingers were warm, steady, and somehow reassuring. The camera clicked, capturing 1,000 lies that almost felt true. "Look at her, Mr. Vale," the photographer instructed. Ethan turned his head slightly, and for a moment, he actually did look at her, not as an employee or a prop, but as if he was seeing her for the first time. His breath caught, and he quickly blinked, breaking the gaze. "That will do," he said quietly. Later that evening, Lila found him alone on the balcony, city lights painting his face in gold and blue. He held a glass of wine he had not touched. "You look different today," she said softly. He raised an eyebrow. "Different how? Like you were not pretending anymore." Ethan's eyes flickered toward the skyline. "Pretending is easier. Reality asks for too much." Lila stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe pretending is what makes you lonely." He exhaled slowly. "You keep saying that word, lonely. Because it fits," she said simply. He turned then, close enough that she could see the lines of exhaustion under his calm mask. "You should not care, Lila." "Too late," she replied. For the first time, his composure faltered. He looked at her as if she had reached inside him and found something he had buried years ago. Then, without another word, he walked away. That night, Lila could not sleep. She kept replaying the look in his eyes, the moment he had almost said something real. The next morning, Ethan surprised her with an invitation. "Tomorrow we attend my family's foundation auction. You will need something more formal." "Another event?" She groaned softly. "Do you ever rest?" He smiled faintly. "Rest is for people who have nothing left to prove." The gala was held at the old Vale estate, a mansion outside the city that looked like it had been carved from time itself. Marble stairs, chandeliers, portraits of ancestors who had never smiled. Lila felt small walking beside him, but his hand on her back reminded her she was not alone. Inside, the crowd shimmered with money and gossip. Lila recognized a few faces from magazines, all whispering behind champagne glasses. As the evening went on, she noticed Ethan's shoulders tense whenever an older man approached. "Who is that?" she whispered. "My uncle," Ethan said under his breath. "He never believed I could run the company." The man reached them, smile too sharp to be kind. "Ethan, always the showman. And this must be your latest project?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "This is Lila Hart, my fiancée." "No." Lila extended her hand with a polite smile. "It is nice to meet you." The uncle's gaze lingered too long before turning back to Ethan. "You always did have a taste for charity cases." Lila froze. Ethan's eyes turned to steel. "That is enough," he said coldly. The tension crackled like static. The uncle chuckled and walked away, muttering something about family reputations. Lila whispered, "You did not have to defend me." Ethan looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Yes, I did. Call me mate." Later, outside on the stone terrace, Lila found him again, standing under the soft glow of garden lights. "That man was cruel," she said gently. "But you were different tonight. You did not hide." He gave a half-smile. "Maybe I forgot which part I am supposed to play." "You played the right one," she whispered. A faint drizzle began to fall, cool and steady. He glanced at her hair, then at the sky. "Come inside, you will catch a cold." She shook her head. "I like the rain. It feels honest." He looked at her for a long time. Then, almost against his own rules, Ethan reached out and brushed a raindrop from her cheek. The air between them tightened, charged with something fragile and real. Lila's breath caught. "Ethan." He pulled his hand back quickly, retreating to the safety of his distance. "Good night, Miss Hart." But as he walked away, his hand trembled slightly, the smallest sign that the walls he had built were finally beginning to crack. The morning after the auction, headlines filled every major business page. Ethan Vale's mysterious fiancé stuns at charity event. Photos of Lila in the navy gown spread across social media like wildfire. Strangers debated who she was, reporters chased her for comments, and gossip columns whispered about the girl who had tamed the city's most guarded millionaire. When Lila arrived at Ethan's office, she found him standing before the window, phone pressed to his ear, his voice sharp and cold. "No, we do not respond to speculation. Keep statements minimal and professional." He ended the call and turned toward her. "You handled last night well," he said, his tone controlled but softer than usual. Lila shrugged. "I did not do anything special." "You did," he said simply. "You made them talk about something other than business." She smiled faintly. "I'm not sure if that is good or bad." "It is good," he replied. "For once they see me as human." That afternoon, Ethan invited her to lunch at a private garden restaurant hidden behind a line of ivy-covered walls. The waiter led them to a secluded table near a small fountain. It was quiet except for the sound of water and the distant hum of the city. "I wanted to thank you," he said, breaking the silence. "You did more for my image in one night than any PR team ever could." "One?" She laughed softly. "So I am just a PR miracle to you?" His lips curved. "You are something unexpected." The warmth in his voice made her heart stumble. She tried to focus on the food, but every time she looked up, she found his eyes on her. Not the guarded, distant stare she had grown used to, but something more alive, something that felt almost dangerous. When they left the restaurant, rain had started to fall again. Ethan opened his umbrella, but a gust of wind turned it useless, flipping it inside out. They both burst out laughing, standing in the middle of the sidewalk as rain poured down. It was the first time she had seen him laugh, not the polite chuckle he gave in public, but a real, unguarded laugh that reached his eyes. "Come on," he said, grabbing her hand. "My car is around the corner." They ran together, soaked, breathless, and laughing like children. When they finally ducked into the car, her hair clung to her face, his suit was ruined, and neither of them cared. For a moment, the contract, the rules, and the walls between them disappeared. Later that evening, Claire handed Lila a small folder. "Mr. Vale asked that you review the next week's schedule," she said briskly. Lila flipped through the papers and froze. The first event listed was a press conference announcing their engagement party. She looked up. Engagement party? That was not part of the agreement. Ethan stepped out of his office just as she spoke. "It is a simple event," he said calmly. "It will solidify the narrative." "The narrative," she repeated, frustration rising. "Do you hear yourself, Ethan? This is not a movie." His eyes hardened. "It is business." "Maybe that is the problem," she said quietly. "You think everything is business. Even me." He paused, visibly hurt by her words, though he tried not to show it. "Lila, the media will not stop until they have something to believe. If we cancel now, they will tear you apart." She took a shaky breath, realizing he was not entirely wrong. Still, her voice trembled as she asked, "And what about you? What do you believe?" For the first time, he did not have an answer. The engagement party was held at the Glasspire Grand Ballroom, where their story had first begun. Lila arrived early, feeling strangely out of place in the gold dress chosen by Ethan's stylist. Reporters lined the red carpet outside, flashes bursting through the glass doors. When Ethan entered, the room seemed to shift. He greeted investors, smiled for cameras, and said all the right words. Lila stood beside him, her hand resting in his, the perfect picture of devotion. But inside, her chest ached with confusion. Halfway through the evening, an unexpected voice echoed across the room, the same uncle from the charity auction. "Quite the performance, Ethan," he said loudly. "But tell me, does your fiancé know this engagement is just another deal?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. Ethan's expression went still. Lila felt every eye turn toward her. "That is enough," Ethan said, his voice sharp. The older man smirked. "You always were like your father, hiding behind contracts and pretending they are love letters." Ethan stepped forward, anger flickering in his eyes. "Leave her out of this." But the damage was done. Cameras clicked, whispers spread. Lila's heart pounded as she looked at him, realizing for the first time how heavy his world really was. She leaned closer and whispered, "I can handle the truth, Ethan. Can you?" His jaw clenched, but he said nothing. When the crowd thinned, she slipped away to the balcony, staring out at the storm building beyond the city lights. She heard the door open behind her, then his voice quiet, restrained. "You should not have to hear that," he said. She turned, rain flickering against the glass between them. He was right about one thing. This is a performance, but I do not know which part of it is still acting. He took a step closer. "You knew the rules." "Yes," she whispered, "and I kept every one of them. You are the one who changed the script." The silence that followed was heavier than the thunder outside. Ethan reached for her hand but stopped halfway, afraid to finish the gesture. His voice dropped to a murmur. "Lila, if I could undo the rules, I would." "Then do it," she said, her eyes glistening. "Because the man who wrote them is not the man I see anymore." Or one. For a moment he looked at her as if the entire city had vanished, only her, the rain, and the truth standing between them. Then, almost in a whisper, he said, "Careful, Lila. You are making me forget who I am supposed to be." She smiled sadly. "Maybe that is the point." Outside, lightning split the sky. Inside, Ethan Vale realized that every rule he had ever written was already breaking, one heartbeat at a time. The night of the engagement party marked a turning point neither of them saw coming. The world saw a glittering couple framed by luxury and charm, but inside the shimmering ballroom, both of them felt the weight of the lie pressing down. After the confrontation with his uncle, Ethan disappeared into the storm outside. Cameras searched for him, reporters speculated, and Lila stood alone among champagne flutes and hollow laughter. The lights felt too bright, the air too thin. Every smile she gave to the crowd felt like a bruise. When the party finally ended, she walked home without the car, heels in her hand, dress damp from the rain. She replayed his last words in her mind. "You are making me forget who I am supposed to be." For the first time, she wondered if he meant that as a warning or a confession. The next morning, Ethan showed up at her apartment unannounced. The rain had not stopped, and he looked like he had not slept. His tie was gone, his hair slightly disheveled, a rare imperfection on a man who lived by control. "I owe you an apology," he said, standing in her doorway. "Last night should never have happened." Lila folded her arms. "Which part? Your uncle humiliating us, or you saying nothing while he did?" He looked down, shame flickering across his features. "Both." She sighed, stepping aside. "Come in before the neighbors start filming this." Argo. Ethan entered, scanning the tiny apartment, the sketchbook stacked by the window, the chipped coffee mug beside the couch, the faint smell of vanilla from a candle she always lit when she was nervous. It was the first time he had seen where she lived, and it struck him with quiet humility. "You do not have to stay in this place," he said softly. "I could arrange—" She interrupted. "I do not want you to arrange anything. I just wanted honesty, Ethan." He met her eyes. "You want the truth? Fine. The truth is I have not been honest, not with you, not with myself. I built a life on control, and you have been undoing it one smile at a time." Her voice trembled. "Then stop fighting it." He took a step closer, the tension between them tangible. "If I do, everything I have built falls apart. Maybe it is time it does," she whispered. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then he reached out, brushing his thumb against her cheek, the same place he had touched that night on the terrace. "Lila." But before he could say more, Claire's voice echoed from the hallway. "Mr. Vale, the press is outside. They followed your car." Ethan froze. Lila pulled away, heart pounding. "You should go," she said quietly. He hesitated. "Not like this." "Exactly like this," she replied, forcing a shaky smile. "Go protect your image. It is what you do best." Toe. He left, and the door closed behind him with the finality of a slammed chapter. That evening, the news channels played footage of Ethan Vale leaving a rundown apartment building in the rain. The headlines spun wild stories. The truth behind the contract engagement, Vale's secret visits. The world that had once adored their perfect romance now tore it apart. 2 days later, Lila received an envelope slid under her door. Inside was her copy of the contract, ripped clean down the middle. No note, no explanation, just the silent message that it was over. She stared at it for a long time before whispering to herself, "So that is how he ends things." But the truth was more complicated. That same night, Ethan sat alone in his office, the contract's other half crumpled beside a half-empty glass of whiskey. His board demanded answers, investors threatened withdrawal, and his uncle had already started maneuvering for control of the company. Everything he had feared was happening, and all he could think about was her. He picked up his phone more than once, but never dialed. Each time he saw her face on the screen, not the version from the gala or the magazines, but the version from the rain, laughing at a broken umbrella. Across the city, Lila threw herself into work at the art foundation where Ethan had once sent donations. She refused interviews, ignored the gossip, and tried to rebuild the quiet life she had before him. But every time she saw a newspaper, every time someone mentioned his name, her chest ached. Weeks passed. The city's attention shifted to new scandals. Yet one night, as she locked up the foundation office, she found an envelope waiting on her desk, gold seal, the same elegant handwriting as before. It read, "There are things I cannot fix with money, but I can start with the truth. Meet me tomorrow, 8 p.m., at the Glass Spire rooftop." Her hands trembled as she folded the letter. She told herself not to go, that he had already broken every rule, including her heart. But the next evening, she found herself there anyway, standing in the same place where their story had begun beneath the endless sky. where love and mistakes looked the same in the rain. When Ethan turned, his eyes were tired but clear. "You came," he said quietly. Lila took a breath. "You asked for the truth. So tell me, Ethan, what was real and what was not?" He stepped closer, rain beginning to fall around them again. "Every rule was fake. Every moment with you was real. Dumber." The thunder rolled above, but neither of them moved. For once, there was no audience, no cameras, no contract, only two people who had finally run out of reasons not to feel. And for the first time, Ethan Vale stopped being the man who made the rules. He simply became the man who broke them, standing in the rain with the only person who ever dared to challenge his heart. The rooftop glistened with rain, each droplet catching the light of the city below. Lila stood frozen, every breath a mix of anger, heartbreak, and something she had tried hard to bury: hope. Ethan's words still echoed in her head. Every rule was fake. Every moment with you was real. She wanted to believe him, but belief had cost her too much already. "Ethan," she said quietly, "you cannot just say things like that after disappearing for weeks." "I know," he admitted, his voice rough. "I wanted to fix everything first. I thought I could make it right before coming back." "Comment." She crossed her arms, rain soaking her sleeves. "You think I cared about your money or your reputation? You left without a word, Ethan. You made me believe I was just another name on your list of controlled mistakes." His jaw tightened, and for a moment, the old, guarded man returned. But then he exhaled, letting the mask drop. "My world collapsed after that night, Lila. The board, the media, my uncle, they all turned on me. I thought walking away would protect you from the fallout." "Our man." "Protect me?" she repeated, her voice trembling. "Do you not see? You were the one thing I did not need protection from." Ethan stepped closer, rain dripping from his hair, his suit clinging to him. "I was wrong. About everything. About love. About control. About what it means to be strong. I kept writing rules because I was terrified of what happens when you stop." Lila shook her head, tears mixing with rain. "And what happens when you stop, Ethan?" He gave a faint smile, sad but sincere. "You fall hard." For a long moment, neither spoke. The city lights blurred into streaks of gold behind them, the sound of thunder fading into silence. Then Lila whispered, "You cannot just say sorry and expect things to go back to how they were." "I am not asking for that," he said softly. "I am asking for a chance to prove that what we had was not pretend. No contracts, no cameras, just us." She searched his face, looking for the man behind the title. He looked exhausted but honest, stripped of everything except the truth. "Why should I trust you?" she asked finally. He took her hand gently, not forcing, just holding. "Because this time there are no rules left to break." The rain fell harder now, thunder rolling across the horizon. Somewhere in the distance, the city carried on, cars, lights, noise. But up here, time stood still. Lila closed her eyes for a moment, letting his words sink in. Every part of her wanted to resist, to walk away, and protect what was left of her pride. But something deeper whispered that maybe forgiveness was not weakness. Maybe it was courage. When she opened her eyes, Ethan was still watching her, afraid to hope. "I do not know if I can forgive you yet," she said quietly, "but I believe you mean it, and that is a start." He nodded, relief flickering in his eyes. "That is more than I deserve." "Say?" For the first time, they stood together without pretending, without roles to play. The storm calmed slowly, the rain turning to a light drizzle. Lila looked out over the city, her voice soft. "You know, the night we met, I thought you were the loneliest man I had ever seen." Ethan smiled faintly. "You were right. And now?" He took a step closer. "Now I am just a man trying to be worthy of the woman who made him feel alive again." "Lub." The wind swept around them, carrying the scent of rain and something new, peace. Lila let out a shaky laugh. "You still talk like a CEO even when you are being romantic." He chuckled. "Old habits die hard." She smiled through her tears. "Maybe some of them are worth keeping." Ethan reached up, brushing a wet strand of hair from her face. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Then let me keep this one standing in the rain with you." She did not answer with words. Instead, she leaned in, resting her forehead against his. For the first time, it did not feel like a performance. It felt like coming home. And as the city lights shimmered below, the man who had made all the rules finally learned what it meant to live without them. The morning after the storm, The city looked new again, washed clean, quiet, and bright. Sunlight broke through the clouds, glinting off wet pavement and glass towers. Lila woke to the sound of her phone buzzing. A message appeared from an unknown number, short and direct. "Turn on the news." Still half asleep, she grabbed the remote. The screen filled with the familiar logo of a business channel. A reporter stood outside Vale Industries headquarters, microphone in hand. "Breaking news," the anchor announced. "Ethan Vale has officially stepped down as CEO following months of public controversy and internal board conflict." In his statement this morning, he said, quote, "No legacy is worth keeping if it costs you your integrity." Lila's breath caught. She turned up the volume. The clip changed to Ethan standing at a podium, surrounded by flashes and microphones. His suit was simple, no tie this time. His voice steady but softer than the man the world had known. "I built a company on rules," he said. "But I forgot that rules mean nothing without compassion. Today, I am walking away to rebuild not a business, but a life that feels human again." He paused then, eyes lifting from the paper in front of him. "There is someone who reminded me what honesty looks like, not just in words, but in action. She is the reason I am standing here as a better man, and I hope she knows that this choice is for her too." Lila froze, her hands trembling. Later that afternoon, the doorbell rang. When she opened it, a courier stood there with a flat box wrapped in brown paper. "Delivery for Miss Hart," he said, handing it over. Inside was a framed photo, their portrait from the charity shoot, the one taken before everything fell apart. But this time, the photo was different. The caption beneath it read, "No more contracts, only promises." Lila smiled through her tears. That evening, she found herself walking back to the Glass Spire rooftop, drawn there by something she could not explain. The sky was clear now, the city glowing gold against the fading blue. And waiting for her, just as before, was Ethan. He looked different, lighter. The weight he had carried seemed to have fallen away. In his hands was a small box, not wrapped in gold, not dramatic. Just simple and honest, like the man standing before her. "You resigned," she said softly. "I had to," he replied. "I could not ask you to believe in me while I was still hiding behind everything that broke us." She stepped closer. "And what now?" He smiled faintly. "Now I start over with you, if you will let me." Ethan opened the box. Inside was not a diamond ring, but the broken pen she had used to sign their contract, now repaired, polished, and engraved with 2 words, "Our beginning." Lila laughed through her tears. "You kept this?" "I kept everything," he said. "Even the rules. I just rewrote them." She looked at him, her heart full and unguarded. "And what are they now?" He took her hand gently. Rule 1. Tell the truth. Rule 2. Keep your promises. Rule 3. He hesitated, smiling. Never forget the woman who made you believe in love again. Her eyes glistened as she whispered. And Rule 4? He leaned closer, his voice low. There are no more rules. The wind stirred around them, carrying the city's heartbeat through the night. When he kissed her, it was not a storybook ending. It was real, imperfect, human. Below them, the lights of New York flickered like stars, and somewhere in the reflection of the glass, the old version of Ethan Vale, the man who wrote rules to avoid pain, disappeared completely. When they finally pulled apart, she rested her head on his chest, listening to the quiet rhythm of his heart. "Ethan," she said softly, "you fell because of me." He smiled against her hair. "No, I fell because of love. You just reminded me what it was supposed to feel like." The city stretched endlessly beneath them, bright and alive. And there, on the rooftop where their story had begun, the man who once lived by contracts and conditions finally found freedom, not in power, but in choosing love over control. Weeks passed, and for the first time in years, Ethan Vale lived without an assistant scheduling his every breath. The city still whispered his name, but now it was different, not as a scandal, not as a headline, but as a story people wanted to believe in. Lila returned to her art foundation, and Ethan began volunteering quietly behind the scenes, helping raise funds for children's creative programs. Gone were the bodyguards in black cars. He took the subway, learned to make his own coffee, and found joy in things that never made a profit. Sometimes, when he arrived early, he would sit by the window and wait for her, the woman who had turned his empire of rules into a life that finally felt real. One evening, as the foundation prepared for its annual charity showcase, Lila walked into the main hall to find something unexpected. The walls were covered with sketches, photographs, and letters, all collected from the people they had helped over the past year. In the center hung a framed piece of paper, yellowed and torn slightly at the edges. It was the original contract she had signed months ago, except this time, the words had been replaced. At the top, written in Ethan's unmistakable handwriting, were the new terms. Clause 1. Love is not an arrangement. Clause 2. Kindness is never weakness. Clause 3. If you must fall, fall for something that matters. Lila turned, tears welling, as Ethan stepped into the light. I wanted to make this official, he said softly. Our new agreement, no signatures, no conditions, just two people trying their best. She laughed through her tears. And what happens if one of us breaks the rules this time? He smiled. Then we make better ones. The music from the showcase began to play a slow piano melody, echoing through the hall. Ethan offered his hand. Dance with me? She took it without hesitation. As they moved beneath the soft lights, the world outside faded away. The rain started again, gentle and steady, tapping against the tall windows as if blessing the moment. Lila looked up at him, her voice tender. Do you ever miss it? The power, the control, the business world? Ethan shook his head, a small smile forming. Power is lonely. Control is cold. This feels like living. The song swelled, and he drew her closer. You once told me you had never been kissed, he whispered. Does that still count? She smiled, eyes shining. No, you changed that, remember? He laughed softly, pressing his forehead to hers. Good, because I plan to keep reminding you for the rest of my life. The camera of the world no longer followed them. No one was watching, no headlines waiting. It was just two hearts, steady and sure, learning how to move in rhythm. As the music faded, Ethan looked at her and said, You saved me, Lila Hart. She shook her head gently. No, Ethan, you saved yourself. I just stood beside you when you finally decided to start living. He kissed her hand, whispering, Then let us keep living one honest day at a time. Outside, the rain glowed under the streetlights like falling stars. And inside, surrounded by art, laughter, and the quiet promise of a better tomorrow, the man who once made the rules finally learned the simplest truth of all, that love does not need conditions to last. It only needs two people brave enough to choose it, again and again. And that was how the story of the millionaire who made the rules finally ended. Not with power, not with perfection, but with peace.